Hi, everyone. So, continuing our series of discussions around the Social Housing Barometer, which BDO have recently issued, I have with me today Tony Russell. Tony, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, Hamid. I am Tony Russell, and I am Executive Director of Resources for the Regenda Group, which includes, amongst other things, the finance portfolio.
Thanks, Tony. So, Regenda Group, Tony, you an organisation. Just really useful just to know a little bit more about Regenda and where you're based, and particularly the diversity of your group.
Yeah, sure. So Regenda came into its sort of current group form in around 2011. It's a combination of three distinct, geographically separate stock transfer organizations. Unit numbers is around the 13,000 mark, turnover around the 70 million pound mark, operating margin around 15 million pounds. Um, Regenda sees itself primarily as a housing and regeneration group, um, not wedded necessarily to development volume numbers necessarily, but more about development within the wider regeneration context based on the specific needs and circumstances of our what we describe as our heartland areas, to improve neighbourhoods, rather than chasing numbers for the sake of chasing unit numbers. So that probably makes us a little bit different from some of the other organisations. But also, we are very focused upon improving, providing opportunities for people within our neighbourhoods as well, typically around careers, education, and training provision. So that's a big feature within our group, certainly over the last few years. So yeah, that's a little bit about ourselves, really.
Brilliant. So, Tony, just going towards looking at the barometer survey, which obviously we do. We talk to key people in the sector and ask them about what they see as the key issues and risks, and just looking at some of the results that came back from that. One of the interesting trends around it was the emergence of ESG onto the key priorities for focus for the sector. And I suppose that what would be interesting to sort of get your take on is the fact that as you talked about your agenda, and it's wider than just housing, how that whole agenda is flowing through in terms of yourselves in terms of agenda.
Yeah, so we are, and I think this has been driven at board level, really, and it's good to see, is a renewed focus and an increased appetite around the environmental side of ESG. In terms of social impact and social objectives, whilst we've always wanted to be the best that we possibly can around that, we're quite proud of our track record around social impact. Certainly over the last 5 or 6 years or more, um, and around governance and corporate governance. Like many in the sector, we hold ourselves accountable to our wider stakeholders, including the regulators in that regard. So we're quite proud of our track record in that as well. I think with the environmental aspect of ESG, we've always wanted to do better, but we've felt partly we've needed some strategic direction from the government, working in collaboration with the rest of the UK sector, and sort of playing our bit, our small bit in the wider global context of that as well. So what we've seen and what we've been working on with the board for the last 18 months or so is working up what our approach to the environment should be, going beyond where we can and where it's sensible to do so for our organisation, going beyond the government's commitments to energy efficiency obligations to 2030 and the wider sort of decarbonisation agenda to 2050. We've done quite a lot of work around that. We've got an environmental strategy in place now. We've got a new corporate plan, which that is a key pillar. The environmental strategy is a key pillar of our new corporate plan. And we're faced, as the regulator often talks about, is our strategic choices. We recognise that our strategic choices for our organisation are going to be slightly different to others. There's a lot of commonality, but a nuanced approach is always going to be needed. So we're really excited about playing for the environmental agenda to play a bigger part in our path moving forward.
Brilliant. And I think it's really interesting to see that you're doing this it's been led by the board and it's a real area of focus for you. I suppose in terms of looking at some of the other things that are coming through, is obviously in terms of financial stresses. And what's interesting is talking to organisations the last couple of months is that they see potentially a period of greater stress on the sector around surpluses, cash flow, primarily driven by COVID, but also actually with some of the things we're seeing very recently around inflation increase and potentially 2022 inflation potentially getting up to 6%. How are you reacting reacting towards that in terms of dealing with some of the challenges around that? Where do you see particular stresses for your organisation?
So I think the work that we do as a sector can often be described as sort of counter-cyclical to what's going on in the economy generally. I think we operate in that space where to some degree we're not necessarily faced with exactly the same challenges as in other parts of the economy. That said, I know we are as an organisation similar to others witnessing pressures around cost and cost control. We are looking with a concerning eye towards inflation levels and trends over time, and arriving. We've probably got there now. Arrived at the view that probably not going to be transitory in nature. And we're already into the realms of reappraise and development schemes, looking at supply chain management with our in group construction, maintenance and construction subsidiary, because they're seeing some challenge, not just around cost increase in terms of labour and materials and supply chain management, but skills retention, which I think has come through the survey as well. We are seeing that and feeling that and witnessing it, and trying to respond as effectively as we can to that, really.
Yeah, no, I think so. I suppose one of the key bits around some of these financial challenges, and say you've seen it come through from a materials perspective in particular, but also from a tenant's perspective. Have you had much discussion at board around the rent increase because it's linked to CPI, isn't it? So what do you see some of the challenges around that?
Yeah, so it's quite timely, really, because what we tend to do in our organisation is the business plan process sort of straddles almost 6 months, really. And what we start with is a set of proposals informed by what's playing out in the economy. Based on the regulated sectorist profile, based on information that's shared by our treasury advisors, we take what is essentially our first sort of decision paper to board, which is around the assumptions, the business plan assumptions. So that went yesterday, actually. So there was a good debate yesterday, and what came up obviously is the assumption around the rent increase. And whilst it is just an assumption and a working idea, really, We will bring back a rent plan paper for decision at the February board with effect from next year, and I undoubtedly there will be a strong conversation about customers. We've always had that debate about customers really in terms of affordability, and I think whilst during COVID our financial results were pretty good and pretty robust, and rent performance was very good as well. Um, I think this year, and I think the inflationary pressures, the removal of furlough, the changes around universal credit, I think will and energy prices, the cost of heating one's home, uh, absolutely creating, unfortunately, a perfect storm for customers. And I think that we're that's not lost on us. It's not lost on our board, and I think there will be some very passionate discussion when we next revisit it in the February. So what our board have asked us to set out is a series of scenarios. So under what conditions, what happens to the business plan under a CPI only increase, under a CPI plus one, under a freeze to the rent increase, um, because they want to make an informed decision because they know
Yeah.
how important it is and how much it's going to affect customers. I mean, that said, what we've always done whenever the decision's been taken to apply the rent increase is what we can do around support for tenants. So we've invested heavily in what we describe as our financial inclusion team, making sure that tenants are signposted and supported through access and benefits to and other measures to maximise their income, and that'll continue. But yeah, it's going to be tough for customers undoubtedly going into next year.
Yeah, no, and I think it's going to be an interesting time for all organisations. I suppose the added challenges is around your employees, for example, who will um, expect, in terms of looking at their pay agreements and looking at potentially increases in line with what inflation is and actually the cost of living is. I think there's some real challenges there for social housing providers, but not just social housing providers, all organisations, I
I mean
suppose.
that's right. How many? I mean, we're looking at we haven't looked at a staff increase assumption, inflationary assumption of 3% for quite some time, and yet we're there, and we're there thinking, oh, is that going to be enough? So yeah, it's and that's playing out against a need to retain talent within and attract new talent into the business as well. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the interesting things that came out from the survey was efficiency and innovation in previous years was a lot higher up, um, in terms of, I think, in terms of the key priorities for organisations, and actually it dropped significantly this year. Um, and from your perspective, do you see any? I suppose there's an element of COVID there, and people sort of battening down the hatches a little bit. But is there anything that, from in terms of those areas around efficiency and innovation, are they still key areas for your organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a little bit surprised to see that result from the survey, to be fair. And I suspect you're right. Um, it's probably people's minds were taken more with COVID and business continuity rather than anything else. That said, for us, you know, efficiency and innovation allows us to do more of the outcomes, achieving more of the social outcomes that we challenge ourselves with as an organization. So it's not something necessarily that we want to make as a strategic objective as such. But we do see it as a cross-cutting theme that allows us to do more of the rest of the strategic objects that we know we're here to do. So and I do think that the whilst we all may have been a little bit preoccupied with the pandemic in recent times, including the regulator, it efficiency and value for money has never gone away in their eyes. And I think as each year goes by, I just suspect that COVID aside, that they are becoming the regulator that is increasingly more expectational around organizations, regulated entities delivering more value for money as a way to partly cross-subsidize more homes for on behalf of the government, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely going to be something that is going to remain a focus. But as I said, if not, it did sort of change a little bit compared to previous years. Did you mention the regulator there? And interesting, a couple of weeks back, the regulators sent out the initial potential KPIs around consumer standards. So how Regenda approaching that and that change in regulatory focus?
I suppose it's fair to say that we welcome it. It was a bit. For speaking from a personal perspective, when the regulator moved to the economic standards, was it 2012, something like that? It felt like there was a missing bit of the jigsaw, and I did wonder then. It might seem with the benefit of the hindsight now, but it wasn't. So pre-Grenfell, I think that there was just a direction of travel here that was risky, at least on behalf of the government. Thankfully, it's back now. It's back with a renewed focus, and I think as a sector we probably do welcome it. We certainly welcome it at the Regenda Group. And what it's helping us to do, it's really sort of almost giving us a mandate to whilst what we describe as customer engagement, resident engagement, has never gone away for us. We're definitely looking at it with a renewed vigor, and we're definitely putting customer engagement sort of back in and elevating it within our governance arrangements as well. So that's good to see. I mean, in terms of the metrics, we've always had our own customer metrics. They've never been retired or relaxed in any way. But I think the customer voice bit is massively important, and we're seeing an increase in interest in terms of engaging with the organisation on behalf of customers, which is good to see. And I think the skill now is about making sure that we use innovative ways of getting as much impact from the customer voice as possible. Technology is there now in a way that it wasn't there 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, there's new and different ways that we can use to make sure that customer voice is reflected within the strategic objective setting for the business.
Oh, no, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see how all that pans out and that increased focus. Like you say, it's almost going. Me and you've been both in the sector long enough to remember when there was that focus and then it went, which I think all of us thought was a little strange, but now it's back again. Tony, thank you very much for your time today. I mean, we've sort of run out of time. We've obviously covered a number of subjects, and it's really been really interesting to get the take of yourself and actually for Regenda Group and some of these key issues. So thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you. It was great to join you and chat through some of the challenges, Hamid. Thanks again.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye now.